Hi everyone, welcome to Dave's Guide to IT. Today I'm going to be going over how to prepare for an interview. So following on from the last episode, you've put together your fantastic CV and cover letter, and now you've got an interview. Great work. Now everyone is different, but for most people, interviews are one of the most stressful parts of the whole process of finding a job. The good news is you can do a few things to help you prepare. And if you go into the interview feeling like you know what to expect, you've prepared as much as possible, you're going to feel a lot better about it. And you're giving yourself the best possible chance to succeed. First off, if you've made it to the interview, know that you've already done well, especially if it was an entry level position where there might have been well over 100 applicants. Your CV and cover letter showed that you've got something the interviewer thinks puts you in the top few applicants for that role. Take confidence from the fact and know that they would not have invited you for an interview if they didn't think you already had something to offer. Your job is to confirm what they already think. They're not trying to trip you up. Trust me, selecting a short list of people that you want to interview, usually only 3 or 5 per role out of all the people who applied, was probably a really tough decision. And if you were selected, then something about your experience, your skills, personality that came across, you think is a really good team fit, something that stood out to get you that interview in the first place. Now then, the flip side of that is that you need to know that no matter who you are, no matter how good your CV and cover letter was, you will not get an interview for every job you apply to. There could be a lot of reasons why. They might have had nothing to do with anything you can control. If you get interviews from 20% of the jobs you apply for, then you're doing really well. And again, just to clarify on that, it could be just that the other people who happened to apply at the time you applied, they had much more experience, qualifications, a lot of internal candidates, whatever it might be. You can't control that. All you can do is do the best that you can. If you're applying for a lot of jobs and you're not getting any interviews at all, maybe then there's a reason for it. Check through your CV and cover letter. If you can, get somebody else to have a read through them, and maybe they'll have a different perspective and be able to give you some feedback on some things to adjust, or maybe some different wording to use, or things to include. Take a look at the jobs you're applying for. If you're only applying for very specific roles, which there's a lot of in IT, but you maybe don't have quite the experience or the qualifications for those roles, think about adjusting the jobs you're applying for. It might be that it's a better opportunity for you to go for a more general role, but within a bigger company or government agency, for example, which has got those specialty roles that you really want to move into. Internal applicants have always got an advantage over the external candidates. You've got a chance to show what you can do. You're already in the door. You get to know the people, the teams, the culture of the organization. It always gives you a leg up, an advantage. You know a lot more about the organization, how it works, the technology that's involved, all that kind of things. It can be really worth it. So give it a try. There's a lot of people I know who went for a very specific, they want to go straight into programming, for example. They only wanted a job as a programmer. In a very tough job market, if you might have the qualifications but you've got zero experience, it's really hard to get that initial interview alone, never mind to successfully get the job. Sometimes it's better to start at the bottom and work your way up through a department or an organization. Again, it can be difficult. Not every organization is great for mobility, so it is something you need to do a bit of research about. Find a place where they actually support your development and they're keen to bring you on the journey. It's usually something people will be fairly upfront about. You can often find out a lot of information from talking to other people in the industry, talking to anyone who might work there. But generally speaking, it's something which government does pretty well, and bigger organizations do. If it's a small organization, even if the people and the managers are great and they're really keen and they're invested in your feedback, it can be a lot harder to get that progression just because obviously there's less available jobs that are going to come up. For example, at Stats, there's 9 different DevOps teams. So if you're wanting a job which is in any one of those teams, you've got a much higher chance than a small place where they might have one of the role that you want. You might have 18 at Stats of that same role, for example. And Stats is by far and away not the biggest agency at all. Always be upfront about what your long-term objectives are in the interview. It's a good thing to have goals that you want to walk towards. I know some people can be a bit hesitant, especially if they're applying for, say, service desk. They don't want to mention in that interview for a service desk position that, oh, I want to be doing this other job. As long as you're treating it with respect and you're clear about the fact, yes, this is the job I'm applying for at service desk, I'm going to give it everything. I'm going to prove, the performance that I can do. I'm going to work hard. These are all the things that I can bring to the job. I'm willing to demonstrate it, but I'm looking for an opportunity in the future. That's good. That's showing that you're aware, you're willing to put the time in, and you're willing to build that relationship with the organization and progress. If the organization is one of those where there isn't much in the way of opportunities or they don't really support people for doing that, then they might get put off. But in that case, you don't want that role anyway if you actually want to be making that progression. So it's not really a loss. Do your research. At least do a Google search of the organization you're applying to. Find out as much as you can about what kind of work that they do, and that will give you a good idea of the technology they might be using and what's important to them as an organization. Reread the job advert, the position description. Pay attention to what they're looking for and think of some specific examples you can give that exemplify the stuff that they're looking for. So the best way I've found to do that, and again this is standard across interviews in not just IT but pretty much any job, is try to think of STAR responses. If you're not familiar with what STAR responses, it stands for situation, task, action, result. So start with a situation. Describe a situation you've demonstrated the behavior that they're looking for. Task. Explain what it is that you had to achieve. Action. Talk about the specific actions that you took to complete the task. Result. Finish up with what the outcome was from the actions that you took. So many times in an interview, they'll do a part of that and not finish it off. For example, they'll give you a situation and they'll say, oh yeah, we did a thing. And you're sitting there as an interviewer waiting for them to, what was the result? What was the outcomes? How did it go? How was it received? And you can prompt on some things. It depends on the context. But other things you've got to kind of, if they're never volunteering information, you've got to just kind of mark it off. Take a notebook. It can help you a lot, especially if you're nervous in an interview. Write down some of the examples you've thought up beforehand so you don't have to worry about blanking in the interview. It's also really handy in the interview itself. When you're being asked questions, take some quick notes on the key things that they're asking about and make sure you cover off all of those key points in your answer. Think up some questions. Most interviews will include asking if you have any questions for the panel. And it's good to have some prepared, but do try to find something you genuinely want to know about the organization, about the role, what kind of training, what kind of training and development is available, for example. Try to find something specific. A lot of times either people go, I've got no questions, or they've got a very, very generic question, or it's one which we've already covered in the setup for the interview, in the brief, or even worse, provided it already in the job description. It doesn't look good if you're asking that same questions that have already been provided. It just makes it feel that you haven't really done your preparation. It's not a major job, but you want things to be as smooth as possible. It's one of those things it'll annoy you if you walk out of the interview and go, oh, that was in the job advert. So save yourself that stuff, have a notebook, take some notes, think of some questions in advance. Even if that stuff doesn't come up, you haven't wasted your time. You've prepared, you get used to doing those star responses, and then it'll help you come up with examples and produce it when you need to. It's all about familiarity and a bit of experience, especially if you haven't done many interviews. Make sure what you plan to wear is appropriate. Dress as smart as you can. Things have changed a lot over the years and workplaces have generally gone a lot more casual. But interviews are still one of those times when you want to go as formal as you can. You probably don't need to go for a full suit nowadays, but it wouldn't hurt if you've got one. Generally speaking, try to go long sleeve shirt with a collar. Like what I'm wearing right now, I wouldn't wear this to an interview. Seems fairly obvious, but again, it's one of those where I have done interviews where the person's turned up in, it's New Zealand, jandals and shorts, and a t-shirt with, let's say, slogans or various stuff that weren't necessarily work appropriate either. Painful. Don't do that. Still not that formal, but you still want to make a good first impression, and dressing up a bit does help. Lastly, timekeeping. Try to arrive about 5 minutes before the start of the interview time. You don't want to go too much earlier than that. You definitely don't want to be late. If something unavoidable happens and you're either going to be late or you can't attend, contact the interviewer and let them know. They might be able to reschedule, but even if they can't, you'll avoid leaving a bad impression, which could affect you when you're applying for future positions. You don't want to arrive too early either, as it can be awkward for everyone involved, especially if the interview panel's in the middle of setting up the interview room or finishing up the previous interview. If you've got the spare time, and you arrive, say, half an hour early, so that you're not rushed, grab a coffee nearby to where the interview is going to be held. Sit down, have a coffee, and then you go in, relaxed as possible, still have time to sign in at reception, for example. That's why you want those 5 minutes. Most places will have some form of visitor registration you're going to have to fill in. That's about it for the interview prep. For the next video, what I want to do is I want to do a mock interview. So give someone a bit of interview practice, give them some feedback. Obviously, it's going to be recorded for the channel, so you have to be comfortable with that. That's a lot to ask. But if there is somebody who wants that interview experience, please reach out and contact me. You can contact me through the links on the channel, and we can arrange to do the interview either in person or virtually over Teams, for example, whichever you prefer. And that's it for today. If you like the content, please hit the like button and subscribe if you want to be notified when I release new content. They both make a huge difference to the channel. See you all next time. Cheers.